Of all the news stories of the 70s, President Nixon's trip to China was arguably the biggest and most significant. This story had everything: drama, a conservative U.S. president traveling to the largest, most vociferous communist country in the world; diplomatic implications, it opened the door to a closed nation; and visuals, visits to the Forbidden City, the Great Hall of the People, and the Great Wall made for great pictures. Aside from that, it had a diplomatic breakthrough, live from China, an icebreaker, and one heck of a political and psychological coup for a president who needed it. It was also a special moment in my career. I later won an Emmy for producing ABC's coverage of this most colorful story. The whole trip was an adventure. It actually took form right after the blockbuster announcement that the president would visit China. We knew the coverage had to be pooled. That is, instead of all the networks each bringing their own equipment, one network would be in charge of supplying all of the equipment. At a pool meeting, I drew the lucky number, and ABC became the pooling network, responsible for all the arrangements and the coordination and much of the equipment for the trip. I picked Bob Siegenthaler for the job of pool producer. No one could have done it better. In fact, the Emmy should have had his name on it as well. We received a White House briefing on the progress of negotiations and the party line on manners and morals in China. The day of departure, we rose at 4:30 a.m., met the White House staffers, and drove to Andersen Air Force Base. The C-141 cargo plane we boarded was loaded down with White House communications gear and 2 network TV mobile units. Boarding with us were 4 Secret Service agents and 16 White House communication experts. There were some rows of seats in the back, but NBC producer Dick Fissler, myself, and about 6 others sat on benches with our feet up on the wheels of the TV mobile units. The plane had no windows, so we saw nothing on the flight except tire treads. It was about a 2-hour flight, and we landed right on time at Shanghai Airport. At the airport waiting for us were Siegenthaler, Joe DiGiovanna, the pool producer and pool engineer, and 2 other engineers from CBS and NBC. They really were happy to see us. A week of tough negotiating as to what we could cover on TV and what we couldn't had taken its toll on our colleagues. We boarded buses and headed for the Jingjiang Guest House, as our hotel was called. It was in the same compound where the president would stay on his side trip from Beijing to Shanghai. Our hosts had that first day in Shanghai and all the other days programmed to the minute. If we got a little behind schedule, we would hear, "You come quickly now," and we'd be hustled off into the next destination. After lunch that first day, we were packed into little buses and then to the Children's Palace, which Mrs. Nixon was going to visit. The little buses did not have any heat, and we quickly dubbed them IBOWs, Ice Boxes on Wheels. We used the acronym for fear of offending our Chinese hosts. The first room we entered was huge, and we watched as boys and girls, 8 to 14 years old, rehearsing a gymnastics exhibition, presumably in our honor, but probably a dress rehearsal for Mrs. Nixon's tour of the building. The kids were dressed in all red or all blue and were performing tumbling, ballet, and assorted jumping. It's commonly known that the Chinese are very conscious of not losing face. Well, I lost face in the next room we visited. It was a large room with about 10 ping pong tables, all in action. The players were boys about 8 to 10 years old, and by the looks of it, very good players. Someone in our party knew I played a pretty good game of ping pong. I won some minor tournaments in my fraternity house and in the Army, and said, "Why don't you play one of them?" I blushed and indicated that I didn't think I should. Presidential aide Ron Walker was with us and said, "Go ahead, Wally." I then was humiliated by an 8-year-old player who took 14 straight points from me. He was incredible. I jokingly said that I had purposely lost so that our hosts would not be embarrassed. Nobody bought it. Beijing was a different city than Shanghai. It was not a port or much of an industrial center. It was the capital. They're Washington as opposed to New York. The Chinese plan was to tour us to all the places that President Nixon would visit, settle on camera locations where TV mobile units would park, and the general ground rules for coverage in concert with White House approval. What a way to visit a beautiful city. In the next few days, we had a Red Star, no pun intended, tour, the Forbidden City and former palaces of the imperial rulers of China. That week in Beijing turned out to be at once a tourist delight and a TV producer's nightmare. Getting answers from the Chinese on what our TV cameras could cover was slow and tedious. No immediate decisions were made. As Sieg had warned me, every request was taken under advisement. But we saw that the old imperial palace of the Chinese rulers of the Ming and Qing dynasties in the huge and beautiful setting of the Forbidden City, called that because no ordinary Chinese person in that period could ever enter these sacred grounds. It was breathtaking in its beauty. The Great Wall of China was about a 50-minute drive from our hotel, and the weather was beautiful, a perfect day for the visit. The view and a walk along a part of the wall that had been spruced up for tourist visits exceeded any of my expectations. As the cliché goes, you have to see it to believe it. This massive wall stretching for hundreds of miles can never be captured on film or at all described by this humble writer. Our guide gave us a running commentary on the construction and history of the wall, and I took dozens of photos, but I also had another mission. Before I left home, I asked each of my 4 children what kind of gift I should get them while I was in China. Jenny, Wally, and Nancy left it up to me as to what I thought they would like, but Mary said she wanted a piece of the Great Wall. So as we walked a part of the wall with our Chinese hosts, I kept looking for a loose stone or chunk of the wall that I could slip in my pocket. It wasn't easy as the wall was built with huge blocks of stone, most about 4 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, weighing more than a ton. I also felt that a chunk of the mortar just didn't qualify as a bona fide piece of the wall. After about an hour's tour, I found a loose chip about the size of a 1/4 pound of butter that had fallen off and slipped it into my pocket, unseen by our Chinese hosts. I felt both victorious and guilty. What if every one of the millions of people who visited the Great Wall took some along home? Would there be any left? I felt much better when weeks later I presented this souvenir to Mary, who loved the rock and, by the way, got an A on her history class report on the Great Wall and her accompanying exhibit.